The next session is on India's neighbours, Pakistan, China and the seas. We invite on stage Commodore Srikant Kesnur, former Director, Maritime Warfare Center and Officer in Charge, Naval History Project. Air Marshal Anil Chopra, former Test and Fighter Pilot, IAF, Director General, Center for Air Power Studies. This session will be moderated by Shiv, journalist and author.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Shiv. I'm a journalist. The two guests here have already been introduced. I'll just tell you a little bit more about them to set the context for a subject that is very close to my heart. It's also very topical and timely if you've been looking at the headlines and seeing what's been happening in Kashmir right now. Air Marshal Anil Chopra is a veteran fighter pilot. He used to be a test pilot in the Indian Air Force. He is the only Air Marshal in any Air Force anywhere in the world to have ejected from a fighter aircraft. He still has a broken shoulder from that injury, which he bears even to this day. He is someone who has spent his career not only flying fighters, but being allowed to do things with fighters that normal pilots are not allowed to do. He's a test pilot. That's what test pilots do. So he's an amazing guy, and he's done great things with the Air Force. He's overseen the upgrade of the old MiG-21 fighters back in the day. So an amazing career behind him. Commodore Srikant Kesnur is a doctor, a scholar, a 3-decade veteran of the Indian Navy. He's someone who used to be director of the National Maritime Warfare Center in Mumbai in the aftermath of 26/11. So he's someone who has been on the front lines of how India's cutting edge against maritime threats has unfolded in the years following 26/11. He has written several hugely well-received papers all around the world on an aspect that most countries are still grappling with. But with your permission, sirs, I'm going to keep this session, even though the title of this session is quite theoretical, I'm going to keep it as practical, as timely, and as headline linked as possible. After all, I am a journalist, so I'm going to keep it as accessible as possible. I just wanted to quickly get one thing out of the way. I noticed this morning when I walked into the Pondicherry Lit Fest that right before entering, on the outside, there is a picture of the two army officers and the Jammu and Kashmir police deputy superintendent who lost their lives in Kokarnag a couple of days ago, and I wanted to applaud Alo and her team and all of you at PLF for doing that, because in all my years as a journalist, as an author, I have never seen that happen at a Lit Fest. I haven't seen that happen at any event, and believe me, it's these little things that matter. So congratulations on thinking of it. It's an amazing thing. I've put it out on Twitter. You should go and see the comments there. People are saying, we want this to happen at every event when something like this happens. So my respects on that front. What's happening in Kashmir right now is a very familiar thing. It's day 4 of an operation in Anantnag. I'm sure many of you here have been following it. It's all over the media. It's all over social media. Very emotional scenes at the funerals of officers and policemen. It's also a very familiar sight. It's something that you see happen at least once or twice a year. a large media spectacle in the wake of a terror event, a huge amount of emotion, tributes paid to the brave hearts, and then the cameras move away, and the big questions most of the time are never asked. I do ask those questions, I have to say, on my show at least, but most of the time those questions are never asked because what we are reduced to much of the time in the media and elsewhere, I think, is talking about how many personnel have we lost since the abrogation of Article 370, or how many personnel has China lost since the beginning of the standoff in Ladakh, or how many more missiles does India have than China, or are India's submarines better than China's, or are India's fighter aircraft of a longer range than China's, and other such small level comparisons that don't really affect the big picture. And I do want to talk about the big picture, but before I do that, I wanted to bring Air Marshal Anil Chopra in on this. Let's first talk about Pakistan and then we'll go to China. As far as Pakistan is concerned, Air Marshal Chopra, what we're seeing right now is just another statistic, just another reminder of something that General Ved Malik on my show yesterday said, and it was a very sobering truth, which we all know, but it's something that when you hear someone like an army chief say it, it hits you. He said, in 40 years, India has done absolutely nothing to force Pakistan to change its policy on terror. And that is a truth we need to face. We can do surgical strikes. We can think about the Indus Water Treaty. We can think about all manner of things to punish Pakistan with. But at the end of the day, their policy has not changed. And that is something that is on us. What would you say about that?
Yeah, I totally agree with General Ved Malik. We follow each other on Twitter, and he's one of the very balanced former chiefs who is regularly speaking on this subject. I totally agree. Our relations with Pakistan have been complex. From the day one, the only reason for wars that we have fought between them and us is Kashmir. Every time they attacked, including in 71 war, though we had the activities were mostly in the east, but Kashmir was the issue. The low intensity action that they are doing in Kashmir is significant. It's not started only in 89, but certainly after 89, it has increased. I've lost some very good friends there. And have we done enough to be able to punish them? Big question mark. But we have done. But was that enough is the issue. We had the strike after the, surgical strike after Uri. We had the Balakut strike thereafter, punishing signals. But physically, now why it has not happened? I must tell you, low intensity warfare is the simplest way for a country which does not have conventional superiority or has inferiority in conventional sense for them to keep punishing India. The conditions in Kashmir were like that. Even our own political system, unfortunately, did not contribute well. We allowed, we often made statements. We allowed the Pakistani flag to be, raised in Kashmir. And the conditions were such that it could carry on. But I say with pride, after 370 has gone, it's just been 4 years now. And the terror incidents, if you see in the last 3-4 years, has come down. Unfortunately, the terrorist incident that happened, 2 days back, I'm proud that it was the CEO who's leading the whole encounter from the front. We lost another senior officer, his number 2. Also in the encounter, it's sad, we lost the CEO in Galwan. So the army that way has done an outstanding job. But whether the terrorism will reduce, look at Pakistan is in a political mess. They are in an economic mess. The Baluchs and Baltis are openly revolting. You are having terrorist incidents everywhere. In Afghanistan border, when they thought that they'll get defense in depth, that defense in depth has not happened. But what all more India needs to be doing to stop this terror still remains a question. Yeah.
Because like Air Marshal said, and Commodore Kesnur, I'll bring you in on this, Pakistan is in a mess. That's a reality. they are at a historic low at multiple levels, economically, politically, in many other ways as well. They've been on the verge of civil war as well. The abrogation of Article 370 has seen a quantifiable improvement as far as Kashmir is concerned. I don't know how many of you know, because if you look at the narrative out there, there is still a lot of politics that's played over the abrogation of Article 370. But how many people know that Kashmir so far this year has had more tourism on average than the last 30 years combined on average? Do people know that the number of grenade attacks have come down by 75%? The number of IED attacks have come down by 90%. The number of hit and run cases have come down by a factor beyond 100%. These are visible figures that we can look at as far as measuring the effects of the abrogation of Article 370. And yet, Commodore Kesnur, as with this current case that we're talking about, the terror encounter that's happening in Anantnag, a previous one that happened in Kupwara a couple of months ago, in which 5 soldiers were killed in action, it basically means that the machine has not stopped. Cross-border terror continues. The policy to perpetrate it is alive and well. And even a Pakistan that is battered and bruised keeps this animal alive.
Of course it does. I mean, I go along completely with what you, General Malik, and Marshal said. But what can you do when terrorism is state policy? And so long as GHQ is in charge, this is going to be the principle number one. It is low cost comparatively. And as far as India is concerned, because that's what we are interested in, I think you have to see it as a series of continuous steps that you have to take to progress. And many of them is what you have listed. Internal steps, make Kashmir more peaceful, more secure, encourage tourism, send out resolute signals to Pakistan. And I think we have done that through several mechanisms, including taking proactive steps. Both Balakot and Uri are steps that signify that. Great deal of importance lies in the fact that commanding officers still lead from the front. That shows you the morale and professionalism of Indian Armed Forces. But to believe that this will totally come to a zero, I think is a pipe dream. We hope it happens, but it's not going to happen in the near future. So therefore, what are the possible things you want to do? Now, that's frankly an element of state polity. I can't get too much into that, but you could look at, can we go beyond what we are doing, in terms of what is happening there, civil war, to further exacerbate their situation? Or can you do a social equivalent of Hukka Pani Band and do a bit more in terms of socially boycotting that nation in international fora and other ways to deprive them of the oxygen of publicity? I think these are probably things that you could. But it's not going to come down to zero very soon.
I'll just add to that for a moment, and then you can answer that question, Marshal, which is that within the limits of this discussion, I do want to try and arrive at least a few points of what India can do. Because, whether it is international forums, whether it is dossiers, and I covered 2611 as a young reporter, whether it is, getting them sanctioned by the terror financing task forces or the UN, it has meant very little on the ground. That's what I'm trying to say. Tactically speaking, on the ground, in terms of violence, in terms of how much expenditure India has to commit in Kashmir. Let's never forget that. It's not about the numbers may be coming down, but how much India is forced to spend in Kashmir as a result of this is another matter altogether. So there have been two major occasions in the past where Indian actions supported by state policy, decisive state policy, have resulted in large-scale strategic disruptions in Pakistan. One of them was the 1971 war. The other was Operation Meghdut, where we went and took positions in Siachen. Is it possible? Is it conceivable that a strategic disruption of that kind, and this is not a loaded question, I'm genuinely asking, is foreseeable at some point?
First
Whether
thing,
it is POK, whether it is Balochistan, whatever it is.
yeah, first, I just want to add on to the previous point. First is, international diplomacy, I think in the last few years, we have done extremely well. Whether it's Saudi Arabia, Middle East, UAE, Qatar, everybody wants to make friends with us rather than make friends with them. Some of them may still bail them out by giving some. A second point I want to make on that point is that Indian political system we have to solve. We cannot on Kashmir, on some issues, it's like some foreign policy issue. On Kashmir, we cannot. We have to get our house in order. We cannot have people all the time talking, how the politicians have to sort this out. That is to be decided by them. But I think that this is, causing chaos. My third point in that is, if you follow the writings in Pakistan, you follow the Twitter. There are many guys who follow me on Twitter in Pakistan. Right now, they have started praising Prime Minister Modi. They have praised the G20. You see their writing. They have said what's happening. Look at what the inflation is. Look at the prices in Pakistan. So if you put a combination of these, see, military has a role. Military has been doing it. As you mentioned rightly, 1971, we did what we had to do. Blitzkrieg to Dhaka. We were the first to reach in Siachen. It's costing us money, lives to be maintaining Siachen. But yes, but should we? Sorry. Should we go into POK, take over? Perhaps not yet, not ready. We are perhaps not ready. But are we preparing for it? Maybe, because capability building is always there. So I don't think we can do a strike into POK to take over. But I must tell you that there are intelligence agencies which are not in the open, but who do their job, whether it's in Balochistan, Baltistan, the fundings, etc. I'm sure some of these things would be, going on in their own little way. So it's not that the Pakistan, of course, is, pushing physical terrorists, but we have more or less stopped the crossover. There are elements within India which are sort of receiving funds and doing what they are doing. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Mike, just closer.
Yeah. You can hear me? It's ultimately for the politicians to take these decisions. So I go back slightly to the conceptual aspects. I know you're looking at...
No, by all means, you can...
I'm reminded of what we were told long ago, that a state must be capable of great violence if it has to be called peaceful. If you're not capable of great violence, you're not peaceful but harmless. And if you're harmless, you know what consequences will follow. So I think we have to understand this distinction between what constitutes being peaceful and what constitutes being harmless, which means we must have the capability to have great violence, the state, and to be able to use it at our disposal, which obviously is a political decision. From the military point of view, you have to, as the Air Marshal says, build capacities and capabilities to use state violence as and when you want. And I think that has been happening, in the last few years. And like I said, we showed it a couple of times. We showed it on other occasions when you deployed the Navy, when you used the Air Force, or whatever. The ability of state to respond more proactively. You can also use it, as you said, socially. I mean, G20, earlier he also mentioned, the scientist, Dr. Desraju, excellent point he made about how Chandrayaan has also brought in a little bit of dampener in Pakistan when they see. And I'm telling you this not merely from Chandrayaan now. When they used to see, when you have these goodwill visits and various exercises, when the naval ships built in India were seen by our neighbors in different ports, they would not believe it. They said, "Nahi, ye to tum bana hi nahi sakte ho." So there is a sense of awe, there's a sense of envy, admiration about all this. But having said that, you must also take in what another senior friend of mine said, is the psychology of a urchin who throws a stone at a car, a rich man's car, and believes that he gets some cheap thrills out of it. Now, you will therefore have a windshield broken occasionally. But because you have a windshield broken occasionally, what is the way you would respond? Now, these are things I think that people must think about, because it is good. I mean, some of the things that you suggested is good. But on the whole, the fact that you yourself pointed out that on the whole, there's been a declining graph in terror activities and a whole lot of other things, I think we should look at the positive aspects of that.
So it's important to point out that whatever solution there potentially is as far as India and Pakistan is concerned, it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a slow process. And I did a show recently about the abrogation of Article 370 and its effects. And we looked at data, not government released data, but data that we could get from organizations that are looking and researching at this. And it is visible across indices. I think there were 17 or 18 different things that they looked at, abductions, human rights complaints, grenade attacks, IEDs, crossfire, fratricide, all manner of indexes. The minimum reduction was something like 30-40%. So it's very, very visible. So as far as Pakistan is concerned, I'll leave it at that. Okay, the real issue, which most strategic thinkers talk about, is China. They say, look, Pakistan is an irritant now, like you said, an urchin throwing stones at a rich man's car.
I just quoted a scene.
No, it's a very evocative metaphor. I think most people connect with that. Let's talk about China now. Let's talk about China because China is, if I may put it mildly, a little bit more of a serious situation, right? Since 2020, well, way before that, we've had real visible issues. But since 2020, there has been a large-scale confrontation that has built up. It's become a at least for a few months, it was like a war-like situation. The deployments continue to exist there. China's commitment to building up infrastructure is a level above aggressive, because these are permanent structures, facts on the ground, entire towns and villages being built in Aksai Chin and elsewhere, etc. So, and all of this happening at the same time when you've had 20 rounds of talks with China, and whenever you speak to anyone in the Indian Army, these talks are always happening in a very cordial manner. They're happening cordially. Everyone's happy at these talks. They exchange information. A little bit of disengagement this side and that side. You move back 50 feet, we'll move back 50 feet. But we've still got divisions and division strength deployments in an area where if war breaks out, God help us all, right? So I want to know from you, Marshal Chopra, because the Air Force has had a very, very prominent role to play in all of this. Not only in the deployments in Ladakh, but we've got a new airbase coming up in Neoma in a few days from now. We've got fighter assets and helicopters from different parts of the country stationed almost permanently in Ladakh, which has never happened before. Where do you see this going? Because I think it is pretty clear that this cannot be resolved militarily.
I must tell you that I was the head of Air Force in J&K. So I have seen every inch of J&K, flown myself in the Siachen Glacier and to every post that is near China. Firstly, I must tell you, we didn't do badly in Galwan. It was the biggest mistake Xi Jinping made of creating this incident, because he lost. See, the understanding between India and China was beautifully Modi, and they had 18 summit meetings by then. And thereafter, things were stable. Everything was going honky-dory. India is a big market for them. From every point of view, China should not have antagonized India. 1.4 billion people are angry. and the effects are being visible in the last 4 years. Secondly, we did not do badly in Galwan. Okay, we lost 20, God knows how many they lost. All kinds of figures are floating around. Doesn't matter, lives are lives. But second thing that happened is, it was a wake-up call for India. You know, India today, firstly, I must make it clear to each one of you, the total number of Indian army that is sitting on the LAC is more than the total strength of Chinese army in Tibet and Xinjiang put together. You get these figures right. Okay. Second, as far as the Air Force is concerned, they have 11 air bases across in Tibet and Xinjiang. These 11 are at high altitude. They are mostly dual use. Most of them are civil airports. They've been converted into military. Yes, as Shiv said, they have built infrastructure at these places. They have money. They have pipelines. There is oil coming. They are doing exercises now. All this is happening. But we have more than double the number of airfields. Our airfields at a much lower level. Indian Air Force will be able to do many more missions in that area than China can do. So this is the second point I want to say, that Indian Air Force is sitting pretty. Yes, in aviation, because their economy opened up first, they were 20 years ahead, they could give more money into the defense budgets, and therefore they have been able to spend. They've got a 5th generation aircraft, they've got 150 of them. There is a second 5th generation aircraft coming up. They build their own transport aircraft. They've got converted them into FRAs. They have converted into, AWACS. They have got the bombers. They've got electronic warfare aircraft. Okay, we all know everything that they have got, but we know what is deployable, what is physically over here. We know that bulk of its requirements are in the East China Sea, South China Sea. So, point I'm making to this audience is, we are not badly off, because unfortunately there are some journalists who are trying to paint a picture. There's a journalist who has said that China will run over India in 72 hours. There's a guy, same guy has said that Army Chief Narvane doesn't know how Indian Army should be run. I mean, that is the kind of people who are here. But I will tell you, things are very, very different. And we are in a better position, and Xi Jinping knows it. So he is not going to do anything stupid. It's not that 20 rounds of talks are going on just for the sake of talking. He's also worried. Second, I must tell you that India is the most critical. No, first, before that, look at China. Who are China's friends in this world, in this whole region? North Korea, Pakistan, in tatters. Look at the kind of countries they have. Myanmar, Cambodia, 4 friends. Look at our friends, South Korea, Japan, America, Australia, Philippines, Vietnam. I can give you a list of all these countries. All rich countries. See the armed forces strength of this. Of course, I'll talk more about this tomorrow in my presentation, so I will not, let that go through. The point I'm making is that we are all right. He has made a stupid mistake. The defense minister is missing for last 2 weeks. I mean, what kind of a country is this? So the point I'm trying to make is that we are quite all right, not to get worried, and we will punch them hard, and they will not come because they know the infrastructure we are building. I'm so proud. Neoma Airfield, I had gone 15 years back to see this ground, and I'm so happy that the Neoma Airfield is coming. Our fighters are sitting in toys, the fighters are flying all over. So, great job. Yeah.
Abhijit, actually, Abhijit Iyer Mitra, who's here, who's, in my view, one of our finest writers on defense and strategic affairs, had a session earlier today where he was talking about narratives, and he made an amazing point about narratives. And since Air Marshal Chopra mentioned, someone who made the claim that China can overrun India in 72 hours, which of course is BS, right? But I want to just take it one step further, because I don't know how many of you may have also read a story that is repeatedly told over the last 4 years about how China, as a result of the Chinese deployments, the Indian Army has lost access to about 14 patrolling routes on the LAC. Okay, this story comes annually. The same journalists do the story every year. Okay, every single year that same story is done. I think it's 14. thing. You'll have to believe me, but I can't prove it to you. But a friend of mine in the army sent me a selfie photograph 4 days ago. Okay, he sent it to me in that way where it disappears after you see it, right? Of him on one of those petrol routes, saying, what's going on? Why are they saying that we don't have access to these petrol routes? We totally have access to these petrol routes. So, not only do we have access to some of those petrol routes, which the media claims we don't have access to, it's true that we don't have access to some petrol routes. But what if I told you that as a result of the Indian deployment, the Chinese side has lost access to 17 petrol routes that they used to patrol before this? 17 petrol routes. So taking from Abhijit's point about narrative, my question was, why aren't you guys saying this? Why doesn't the government say this? But then the army says, nahi, rehne do na, theek hai, acha hai. Let everyone think that we've lost patrolling, because then when we go to our our negotiation tables and stuff, they look like idiots because they know they've lost, but our media is saying, no, we've lost. So, we have the upper hand. Say, no, we've lost more. So we get more negotiating strength. And it's actually true. What happens at these talks, they're constantly quoting the media. I really felt very important because they are monitoring media. They're quoting the media. Ye dekho Indian Express. Ye dekho India Today. Ye dekho Times Now. Ye dekho ye. Look at this thing. There are newspaper clips that are exchanged with each other about how each country is looking at this unfolding situation. It's crazy. So the next time someone sends you a forward saying, "Arey dekho, India has lost 11 patrolling routes," please tell them that you have it on authority that China has lost access to 17 patrolling routes on the line of actual control. Now I'll come to you, Commodore Kesnur, because the China situation is a serious situation. Air Marshal Chopra is right. I completely agree with him when he says that China hit a wall in Galwan. It was a terrible price to pay. 20 personnel lost. China, in my reading, lost more than that, but that's a different issue altogether. They don't know what to do now. They're there and they can't go any further. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's a good situation for India. We may have taught them a tactical lesson in Galwan, but the bigger picture is still a bad one as far as India is concerned. How do we solve it?
I wish I had a magic pillow prescription. Look, if we were to look at it as what you and Air Marshal are suggesting, and certainly was there a kind of early imperial overreach, so to say? This is a country that is contesting for big power status with the US, and then it sort of gets into a unnecessary fight with another rising power, and all that it entails. And you've seen much of what that has entailed over the last 2 years. I think to their great displeasure, India and the US and other Western powers have actually become more friendly. The EU has become extremely restive of what the China is doing, and it's voting with its feet now, or with its ships, so to say. So there are lots of, let's say, events that are happening globally which probably don't favor her. And then to see a loss of economy, debt diplomacy, countries in Africa and elsewhere realizing that Chinese help is not so benign, I think that raises lots of positive signs that probably China might see the reading on the wall. But what if it doesn't? So what if it doesn't? Obviously, it's more complex because you're not dealing with Pakistan. You're dealing, all said and done, with a country that has a lot more capabilities, lot more infrastructure, lot more money. So if the question is, what does India do in such a case? I think one, of course, is the answer that's suggested by Air Marshal, that we must, while keeping our land borders intact, not be focused too much on land. We must grow our maritime power and air power, which will be an effective counter to China. Secondly, insofar as the geography that sort of is our area of interest at that moment, the Indian Ocean, we have certain advantages, and we must move faster to secure those kind of advantages. In one way, the friendship that we're doing with a whole lot of countries, what we did at G20, for example, is magnificent, because that is a strategic sort of leveraging of a great deal of your operational and tactical strengths. The third, of course, is I think you can't match China money for money, dollar for dollar. But you can do. What are Indian armed forces good points? One is professionalism, outstanding professionalism to a large degree. And that should be showcased at various points. Second is our very helpful, benign nature. A lot of people have brought it out as a civilizational attribute. I'll give you a very small example. The Indian Navy has positioned 1 Dornier and 2 helicopters in Maldives. In last 2 years, 2021, I think. In last 2 years alone, this small bunch has done medical evacuation or rescue of life of close to 500 people and has undertaken around 425 operational sorties. That's phenomenal, So the amount of what you might call defense diplomacy or military diplomacy that you're doing, I think that's also a good way to keep friends. You need to follow a policy of assurance to friends and insurance against those who might be your foes. I think that combination. So don't go head for head trying to match dollar for dollar. Do things which you're good at.
So as far as it's always problematic when you do a bean count as far as China is concerned.
Absolutely.
Because that's a losing game from the start.
Absolutely.
There is absolutely no comparison. But the many actions that India has taken diplomatically in terms of maritime domain partnerships with countries like Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia recently.
As we're speaking, 31 countries of IOR, RIM and others are in Delhi with Navy doing a maritime domain awareness exchange. This kind of exchange, very few countries do it as charitably and as magnanimously as we do it.
And I think my closing comment before we open this to questions is that please remember that it's easy to think that what's happening in Ladakh is just one concentrated issue and that it's completely frozen there and nobody can do anything about it. Talks are happening. India is taking widespread actions. I think in the last 2 years, the amount of infrastructure that has been built by the Indian Border Roads Organization under the Ministry of Defense exceeds infrastructure built over the last 15 years in just the last 2 years in terms of roads, in terms of tunnels, in terms of air bases and other kinds of infrastructure.
That's another organization which must get its due.
It must get its due. The Border Roads Organization is an organization you don't hear much about. They're not sexy like the Air Force and the Army and the Navy, but they are an organization that requires an equal amount of respect because through rain, shines, and mostly snow, they are toiling away building India's roads in the most far-flung forward areas of Ladakh and at high altitude areas with bulldozers and things like that. It's an incredible sight to see. So, while all of us are sleeping, they're sitting there and building those roads, which would be crucial for us, not only economically in Ladakh, but in case war breaks out, those are the roads that will actually make all the difference. So an incredible, you're right. I completely agree with you on that. So I'd like to open it for questions now on a final note that the G20 recently, as Marshal Chopra also mentioned it, two big actions were taken there. The African Union joining the G20, the new India, Middle East, Europe corridor. All of these have a very, very strong China element to them. So let's not ignore those as well. Thank you very much. Young man in the glasses there. Yeah. Oh. You're the festival director. You should let your guests ask.
So the point I'm trying to make is, sorry, but please suffer me. Maybe a journalist perspective and the armed forces perspective. And that is this, that can we have an honest answer finally, if Pakistan is such a failing state, which is the deep state and why, and what is their strategic interest in constantly continuing to fund Pakistan and support it the way it does, to continue its policy towards India the way it does?
She's asked the journalist first, so.
I'm totally going to duck that for want of time. I'm going to let the experts answer. Marshal Chopra actually answered that a little bit in one of his answers. You wanted to go a little deeper into that? Yeah. Why is Pakistan
Somebody is helping. If it's a failing state, how does it continue to keep its policy the way it does towards India?
Yeah, actually this question requires a full seminar because, who all are the friends. But the point that I made was that whosoever was funding, right now they're funding them only to get out of the IMF problems, to survive as a state. This morning's figures are 7 billion is their total foreign reserves. So nobody is funding terrorism to Pakistan to promote terrorism as of today. It was there 10 years back, 15 years back. There were countries, some OIC countries which were doing that. But currently nobody is funding. But Pakistan army is back in control. For them to neutralize India or keep us at bay, terrorism will carry on. Whatever little army funds have not reduced. The oil prices can keep going up, but the army continues to get the full funding. So I don't think any of the countries right now is funding for terrorism. It's for survival. Yeah.
If
Yeah.
Alu, if I can just add to that, countries, there are many countries. I wouldn't want to take the name. I don't want to get into a diplomatic. No. There are lots of countries that are at the failed state level for a long time, and they can continue to exist there because the harm it happens is to their countrymen, but they take long to realize it. As far as Pakistan is concerned, I think it's very clear. There is some other country which wants Pakistan to oppose India. There are lots of people who want Pakistan to oppose India. You know that better than me. Bulk of the funding, largely through infrastructure. But there could be other interests elsewhere too, where this, that. Not everyone might want to see India rise. So anyone who is inimical towards India finds a ready cat's paw in Pakistan.
We have a lot of those here also.
Okay, so I have a question. Are we ready for a full theaterization, in the sense the use of air support from the early stages of a war? Like practically, would we do that? And also to Commodore Srikant, will the Indian Navy be ready for an interventionist role in South China Sea?
Okay, first on theaterization. We are very close. There were issues that have been discussed in the last 2 years. We are very close to theaterization. Some fine-tuning is being done. The 3 service chiefs are on board. The CDS, the briefings to the Ministry of Defense have been done. So the theaterization will take place. There will be some, issues, some more assets of the Air Force, and they may be controlled centrally. But theaterization is going to take place. Yeah.
Yeah.
The Navy question.
Yeah. Vinit, this interventionist is a political term, like expeditionary. Will the Indian Navy deploy where the government asks it to deploy? It bloody well will. Will the Indian Navy deploy where operational planners want it to deploy? It very well will. Now, whether you want to call it interventionist, offensive, defensive, that's an adjective you got to choose. But the navies deploy where their maritime or national interests dictate, depending on who your antagonist is.
Yeah, good.
So, quick I have 2 questions, very short. One, hey, India, why doesn't India to Pakistani armed forces assets? Because we continue to kill their fodder that they send to us, which is an unfair trade because they're trading their terrorists for our army folks. Second, I love the urchin throwing the stone, but the problem is when we look at China, we're always worried about China because we don't do the same to China that Pakistan does to us. Is that a mindset difference? Is it because we are rational, we expect Pakistan to be irrational and China to be irrational? So is there some sort of a game theory play here where our rationality acts against?
Why don't the Indian Armed Forces target Pakistan's armed forces assets?
Yeah, the military. You see, all terrorism officially, the Pakistan position is that these are terrorists who we have no control over it, despite the fact that every time we have caught a terrorist, we have found, arms and ammunition which have been from Pakistan factories or Chinese or whatever. So, formally, we cannot get into a full-fledged war. Means attacking a military is getting into war. So we did the signal in Uri. We went to Balakot, hit a terrorist, training center. But we cannot get into a direct, hitting a military target. Though we have the capabilities, we have had plans. We have had, the Army and the Air Force have internal plans of that kind. But that is a political decision because you don't want to start a war. Yeah.
Arunji, very quickly, I don't think we need to behave like a quote-unquote street urchin because, look, India's reputation is different and I don't think we should fall into the trap. But I take the bigger point that you make. Are we very predictable and rational in our response? And is there scope, using the game theory paradigm, is there scope for us to be in some ways unpredictable or for him to think we are irrational? I think that's a fair, valid point that you're making. That can we disrupt what is called his OODA, observe, orient, decide, act loop? Is there scope for us to do that vis-a-vis perceivably a stronger opponent? Possibly, yes. And I'm sure those who are in the know and those who are in the business of doing it will probably think of doing that. Which is why, Galwan subsequent reports will tell you that actually his people have died more. And I think in some ways the Indian response to that illustrated that we also can be unpredictable at tactical level.
One question.
Okay, I have a question.
Okay. The three of us are going to be here, so if you want to ask us questions after this also, we'll be here to answer.
So one question about Pakistan, one about China. Both are historical. We have a problem where the military wins wars and the politicians give away the gains of the wars. It happened in 65, it happened in 71. I think it happened even with Kailash Range. But maybe Kailash Range can be addressed. So, Air Marshal mentioned this. How do we deal with this? This is one question. Now, with regard to, and specifically on Pakistan in 1971, we had 93,000 Pakistani POWs. We gave them back for nothing. And nothing included the fact that almost all the 10 million refugees who had come to India stayed in India. They were all Hindus. So we lost territory effectively. Those 10 million had to be accommodated all over India. We're still suffering the consequences. The Bengali Hindus are still coming. So that's okay. Now ask the Pakistan question. The China question is, why do we never use Tibet not only as a bargaining chip, but as a significant strategic asset? I mean, we not only have the Dalai Lama here, we have Tibetan-speaking territories like Ladakh and some parts of Arunachal. Why don't we use a radio-free approach, radio-free Tibet, and deploy non-military
You want to take that first question, Marshal? Tibet as a strategic chip.
Let me quickly cover your first point. I totally agree with you. We should not have in 65 given Haji Pir, because whosoever sits on Haji Pir controls Kashmir Valley. Very bad decision for whatever reasons, irrespective of who the government was. But international pressure, whether in Tashkent, whether it's the Russians, whosoever. 71 war, we had 93,000 prisoners. We should have handed them back on our terms. You cannot trust them ever. You can't tell them they promise, we will do this, we will do that. Unacceptable. My third point on this is that in 1962 war, Indian Air Force was much, much better than the old Russian aircraft which was with China. But because of political reasons, we did not use Indian Air Force. And I'm telling you, we would have lost lesser territory, we would have lost lesser lives in 1962 if Indian Air Force was. We had all Western aircraft. They had MiG-15s, MiG-17s, MiG-19s. And look what we had. We had the all latest Western aircraft. So, all three counts, I totally agree with you.
So Tibet.
On the issue of Tibet, yeah.
Will you say? No, it's your
I will tell you, I meet these Tibetans in Delhi, the Tibetan Central Authority, Central Tibetan Authority. I have met them. I mean, sort of what is going on behind? We military men are not supposed to speak, but what's going on with them and the government and various other agencies? Some kind of action is going on. Is it enough? I do not know. More needs to be done, perhaps. But I have no details. Maybe journalists like Shiv Aroor would know more. Yes.
Just 5 seconds. Only a 5-second response. I'll not give a detailed one. We say in the Navy that we have had a long period of sea blindness. That's a phrase we use. So what you're saying reminds me that sea blindness has also been accompanied by cartographic cataract. So,
Thank you very much.
Let me present to my anchor my latest book, which has got released about 10 days back in a ceremony in Delhi. Yes.